morning.
Hello.
I'm Jay, this is Ernst-Jan. Show of hands first. How many people were at my keynote yesterday? Okay, good. How many people know about the Correspondent and know the basics about it? Okay, that's good. How many people are Dutch? And how many people know nothing about the Correspondent and it's new to them and they want to learn about it? 2.
We meet you afterwards.
Okay, right.
Hi, I'm Ernst. I'm one of the co-founders of the Correspondent. And maybe I'll briefly start for the 2 persons who want to know all about the Correspondent, what we are. We basically are an antidote to the daily news grind. So we don't cover the news, but we try to cover or uncover the forces that shape our society and our lives, but that aren't that visible. And to give you an example, news is almost about the weather, and we cover the climate. That's the difference, how we try to describe it. We try to really help people understand the world around them. So we're trying to shift the focus from the sensational to the foundational. And it's good to know that we're also ad-free, and that's what this panel will also be about. For 85% of our revenue comes from readers. So either through membership, this is a Dutch pie chart, we show our members every year, we show them this is where our revenue comes from. This is the graph of 2016. 68% of our revenue comes from memberships fees, then 40% from books, and some donations. So the summary is that 85% of our revenue comes directly from readers. And that's great because that means that they're our most important stakeholders, that with every decision we make, we only have to think about their needs. And these are just some basic numbers about our company. We started 5 years ago. We now have 60,000 members who pay 70 euros a year or 7 euros per month. And we have 47 people on staff. Half of them are editorial, and then we have designers, developers, etc. And we are now working on a global expansion of the Correspondent. So I moved to New York 5 months ago. You've been a New Yorker for
36 years.
Right, so there's the difference. And while I was working there, when I was having all these conversations with people about the Correspondent and about our plans and about our membership strategy, it was very educational because one thing kept coming back. And that is that most people saw a membership strategy just as a revenue strategy. So last week, for example, I was at a board meeting of a foundation, and I gave a short presentation about what we're doing, and at the end someone said, I still don't get it. Is membership just subscriptions, but it sounds more social? And that's something I'm hearing a lot, and Jay is hearing a lot, and we'd like to talk about that today, because membership is so much more than just a revenue strategy. Right, Jay?
Yes. You forgot the part where when the board member said, is membership just subscriptions with a social sound to it, that you exploded in frustration?
Yes, I left that out.
In 1999, my friend Dan Gilmore, who is at this conference, who was at the time a Silicon Valley columnist for the San Jose Mercury News, and also the first newspaper journalist I know of to have a blog, said something very profound that I've written about many times. He said, my readers know more than I do. My readers know more than I do. So what Dan meant is that he was covering venture capital, new companies, startup world, new products, and collectively, the people who were reading him day to day had a lot more knowledge than he had. Now, that would have been true in 1959. What was different about 1999 is the internet. Those people could reach him easily. They could reach each other. And by saying, my readers know more than I do, he was opening a very big question for journalistic practice, which is, if our readers know more than we do, how do we get that knowledge flowing in to make good journalism of it? So also in the same year, 1999, Slashdot.org. Has sites on the internet that had a genuine community attached to it. Slashdot is a very innovative site. Its subtitle is News for Nerds, and it's a technology site. And they had a very lively comment section. They had, in 1999, they had a lot of innovative features in their comment section, like something they called the Bozo filter, which was, each comment was rated by its quality from, I think, 1 to 5. And then you could filter the comments by quality of comments. You could also filter particular people out of the comment points. Anyway, in 1999, Jane's Intelligence Weekly, which is a specialized site in the UK, wanted to do a big article on cyber war, which was at the time a new subject. And somehow they got the idea of tapping the knowledge and wisdom of the Slashdot community. So the editor arranged for a draft of the article on cyber war to be placed online at slashdot.org. And then the community was allowed to critique it and make suggestions and additions. And the process resulted in a much better article. They withdrew the draft, rewrote it, and credited members of the Slashdot community for the improvements. And in 1999, Salon magazine wrote a feature about that episode. And the title of it was Open Source Journalism. And I remember reading this article, Open Source Journalism, and then reading about this episode. And I thought there's a tremendous potential there for journalism. Can you guys come on in and sit here in the front? Don't stand in the back. Be part of our community here.
There are 4 open chairs
here.
here.
Seats over here,
Yeah.
so come on in. So this idea that the readers know more than we do, and we can improve our journalism by figuring out how to get some of that knowledge flowing in, is an old idea, but here we are 20 years later and we're still trying to make it work. And the reason for that is that there are a lot of problems with doing that. For example, if you give a call out to your readers and say, help us investigate, and people do, the first thing that happens is that you're likely to be overwhelmed by emails and the coordination costs for actually doing something with those emails. And if people are asked to contribute to your project and they accept your invitation and they want to participate and they contact you and nothing happens because you're overwhelmed and you don't have people to actually run this project, then not only have you not improved your journalism, you're actually behind because you've disappointed those people and you've shown them that you weren't really serious about tapping their contributions in the first place. And so it's harder to make use of the knowledge that readers have than it looks. In 2008, in 2006, I ran a project called Assignment Zero, in which we tried to report a trend story with Wired magazine that was an open source trend story. So we tried to research a big social trend and ask all the readers of Wired to help us. And it kind of sort of worked, but it basically failed. And then in 2008, I ran another project called Off the Bus with the Huffington Post, which started in a different way, where our idea was simply, what if any reader of the Huffington Post could contribute to its 2008 election coverage? How would you do that? How would you make it possible for anybody who raised their hand to be a contributor to the election coverage of the Huffington Post? And we ran that project in 2008. It was semi-successful, but we learned a lot. And one of the things we learned was that reporters, at least American reporters, are reluctant to try these methods for one very simple reason. There's places up here. For one very simple reason. And that is, if you want readers to help you report your story, you have to tell them what the story is. You know what I mean? And reporters don't want to do that because they think someone's going to steal my story. And this simple fact that you have to go public with what you're reporting on in order to tap the knowledge of those readers who know more than we do has kept American journalists, at least, from making progress on this. However, in 2016, something very important happened, which was David Fahrenthold of the Washington Post had a beat during the 2016 election, which was Donald Trump's charitable giving, his foundation giving. And he began to get hints that when Trump said he gave money to this and he donated money to that, that actually that never happened. And he stayed on that story for the entire campaign. And he began to not only tell people on Twitter and other social platforms what he was doing, but he began to ask them for help. Like, has anyone seen a copy of this painting? And Trump says he gave money to veterans groups. Would anyone know what groups those would be? And other sorts of call-outs like this that were a little bit different than a typical Washington Post reporter. And I began following him very closely when I saw him doing this. And he began to get a lot of information coming from people. And in the end, readers contributed some very important knowledge. And he broke some very interesting stories by essentially issuing call-outs on Twitter. David Fahrenthold won the Pulitzer Prize in 2016 for that reporting. Now, for journalists, that's pretty much the highest achievement you can have, right? So we decided after that episode to start a project with my membership puzzle project, which I direct, called Join the Beat. And what we're asking is for beat reporters to figure out how to collect on Dan Gilmore's 1999 Insight, My Readers Know More Than I Do, and create a membership strategy for a beat. So we now have 9 sites that we're going to announce next week are collaborating with us. Each of them has named a beat reporter and a beat, and each one of these reporters is going to experiment with how to draw the knowledge of readers into the beat in a regular way, rather than a project way, a routine. And they're going to all experiment with how to create a reader-assisted reporting beat, all going back to that 1999 inset of Dan Gilmore's and that original Slashdot project. So it's been a long road. That's 20 years. We're still trying to figure out how to do this kind of journalism.
I was 10 years old when we started doing this.
Yeah. Fortunately, we have a new generation that's trying to solve the problem because the previous one failed. And Ernst is going to talk about some of the things that the Correspondent is doing to solve essentially the same problem.
Yeah, so we took Dan Gilmore's quote and we turned it into this for our site. And this is what we keep telling our journalists, that 100 doctors know more than one health correspondent. You could replace it with 100 teachers know more than one education correspondent, for example. So what's really important to note is that membership for us is not just revenue. It's also asking our members to share not just their money, but also other things with us. For example, their knowledge or their experience. And I just wanted to give a couple of examples of the things members have been sharing with us, and then tell you how we got there, what we learned and mistakes we made. So our members do all kinds of different things for us. The important thing is that we have to ask them. As Jay said, we have to share our story ideas and the questions we are struggling with. So that has become almost routine at the Correspondent. And this is an example, I think it's now 18 months old, but it's still very relevant because the last scoop coming out of this was published, I think, last week. And this is our renewable energy correspondent. And he posted a call out saying, if you work at Shell, I want to talk with you. I want to talk with you about energy transition, about the future of oil. I want to talk with you about global warming. And I not just want to talk to the spokesperson or the CEO. I rather talk to the people who actually work there, who are underground. So he wrote this call out. We published it in Dutch and English. And we sent it to all our readers and asked them, maybe you are working at Shell and you want to talk with us, or maybe you know someone who works at Shell, just forward this article to them. And so we got a lot of responses, and our correspondent had coffee with, I think, around 20 employees or so, and they started telling him things about Shell and about their work and how they saw it. And he started to understand the company better and better, and he wrote transcripts of these interviews and published them on our site. So he kept like an open notebook. And by doing that, other people working at Shell saw that he really understood what was going on at the company. So they started reaching out to them as well. This is an approach we learned from Joris Luijendijk, a Dutch journalist who's also here at the conference. He did this at The Guardian with a banking blog. So he asked this question, how does the financial world works? And started talking to bankers and had the same approach. And this strategy led to members sharing, for example, internal documents with us. Just last week, we were able to publish documents that showed that Shell already knew about global warming and its dangers and its role in it back in the 80s. So one thing our members do is handing us internal documents, telling us how the companies they're working function. So this is just one example, but it could also be something different. For example, we also ask our readers sometimes to help us with the journalism itself. So I think around a year ago, we told our members there are now a lot of refugees in the Netherlands. We always hear about the refugees, but never from them. So let's organize the biggest group interview in the Netherlands with them. Go find someone who has just arrived in the Netherlands, who's allowed to stay here, and talk to that refugee. Reach out to that person. And over 300 members did that. They found a refugee, they had coffee with them on a regular basis, and at some point we started sending them questionnaires. So we sent them a list of questions they could ask the refugee, and then they could send the answers back to us, which meant we could ask 300 refugees about their experiences in the Netherlands, and our members would take these interviews for us. We had a support group on Facebook where both the refugees and the members could ask us questions about this project and about how they should go about it. And this led to a really big group interview and to several articles that told us how refugees felt in the Netherlands and what they were struggling with. So our members help us interview. They also help us proofreading articles. For example, we recently had a story about polio, and we can see, and I'll tell you more about that later, we can see what our members know. We have a CRM system, a Rolodex, with our members' knowledge in there. So we could reach out to a biologist and ask that person to proofread an article about polio, to fact check whether we have everything right, because it's such specific knowledge. And if a member knows a lot about it, you can ask them to share that specific knowledge with you. So we have handing over documents, sharing their professional, personal experience, helping us with interviews, proofreading our articles. Another thing is that they are our biggest promoters. We ask them to share all our articles. And then at the top it says, this article has been given to you by, and then the name of the member. This has been, for the 5 years that we existed, always the biggest source of growth. Our members being ambassadors of the Correspondent, which is also good for trust, because people tend to trust a link more if a friend or a family member sends it to you. One other example, they also help us, for example, pro bono. So we had a big campaign in the Netherlands about personal debt and how it caused a really big problem in our society. And we wanted to make recommendations based on our research to politicians on what should change in the debt industry of the Netherlands, because the government is the biggest debtor. And so we started this lobby basically based on our research. And we had members who were lawyers who started helping us pro bono in their free time to organize this whole campaign. So they also, they also work with us for free. And they even help us organize sessions at the International Journalism Festival. So on Thursday, Jessica Best, our operations lead for our global expansion, she's sitting right over there, she had a session, group therapy session, about the biggest mistakes we made at the Correspondent. And she invited other people to also share their mistakes, because normally you only hear the success stories at a conference. And that's, of course, well, quite a challenging thing to organize a therapy session at a conference. So she checked our Rolodex, and she found a member who was a therapist. And he helped us, he advised Jessica and helped her setting up this session. So our members even help with these panels. So there are several ways in which our members are helping us. And that shows that membership is not just a revenue strategy, it's also a community that helps you improve your journalism. And I just wanted to talk briefly about how we got here. And I'm doing that based on this article that I published on Medium yesterday that outlines everything I'm saying about this, so you can read it afterwards. First we saw our members just basically as people who support us financially and who commented on our articles. And then at some point, I think after like 9 months or so, one of our correspondents, our healthcare correspondent, asked a very specific question to our members. He was writing about bureaucracy in healthcare, and he asked our members, are you a doctor, and what's the role of bureaucracy in your work? How much time are you spending on filling in forms? And to our astonishment, hundreds of doctors started sending him their experiences with bureaucracy. And we also had patients joining the discussion, telling us how bureaucracy was harming their treatment. We had hospital managers who joined the conversation.
Are you saying that his readers knew more than he did?
Yes. We realized that.
Please continue.
So we were shocked in a good way. We thought, wow, these members, they know a lot. Dan Gilmore was right, Jay was right, and they want to actually share that knowledge with us. So we started asking these questions more routinely. When we started doing that, we noticed that our commenting form was pretty basic. So we introduced a feature called the expertise title, which we took a hint from Quora, the social network for knowledge exchange from Silicon Valley. And we asked our members, if you're a doctor and you're responding in a discussion about healthcare, just tell us that. So we can post it right next to your name. So it says your name, and then it says, I'm a doctor for 20 years, or a doctor with this specialty, or I'm a patient. And by doing that, we could see in the discussion, we could easily scan the discussion and see based on what authority someone was participating in the discussion. Other members could see that. And it also helped putting our members in the mindset that we actually wanted to hear from their personal or professional experience. Not their 2 cents about anything, but their specific knowledge about their area of expertise. So that went well. But then we noticed that, so we published call-outs, we shared our story ideas, we gave these members the opportunity to share their expertise title, but then it went silent for a very long while. People shared their knowledge and then nothing, and then after a while there was this article also based on member contributions. But between there was a long silence, and we basically missed the opportunity to involve readers into the ongoing research process. So then we started writing personal newsletters. Every correspondent has a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter in which they share what they're reading, who they're interviewing, what they're struggling with, and it's like a public notebook. And this gives our members the opportunity to also share their knowledge during the research process. And very importantly, it also creates this space where the journalists and the experts can geek out together. They can use jargon, they can go really in depth, doesn't matter, because that newsletter is supposed to be very specialistic. And then based on that process, the journalist can then write an article that's very rich, very grounded, because he or she had this long exchange with all the experts. So we introduced those newsletters, but then we thought anyone can just tell us that they're a professor of law, for example. We trust them, but every time we wanted to use such a contribution in our reporting, we had to check whether that person was actually a professor of law. So we had to reach out to her office, calling her, or reach out to the university, email her, and that's of course what a journalist normally does, but it was a very ad hoc process. Every time you had to do that, you had to verify a member, and it didn't really make sense to not do that in a more systematic way. So then we introduced this verified check mark. So as soon as we checked whether someone actually was a doctor or was a professor of law, we showed this verified check mark. So now this has two benefits, because we started creating this Rolodex, basically of verified expertise titles, so we could see what our members knew, and we knew one of our colleagues had verified that in just a classic journalistic way, but also our members could see that that doctor was actually a doctor. So by doing this, we were creating this Rolodex basically, and one afternoon a developer came up to us and he said, oh, by the way, I grouped all those expertise titles. So now you can easily search them. And now we had this, well, this huge reinvented Rolodex of what our members know. And the last thing we did so far in improving ways members can share their knowledge with us is we created a new position, a conversation editor. She's sitting right here. She has a new job. Her former job, her name is Gwen Martel, former job was answering all the questions for our members. So I think you've had around 1,000, well maybe more, 5,000 conversations with members, so you know them well. And Gwen's job basically is to improve the discussions on our site. For example, by inviting voices to the conversation, by signaling groupthink, and then in organizing critical dissent. For example, a couple of months ago, we had a story about prisons and how people who ended up in young people who ended up in prison returned to society. And this was a story about an American prison and about an American organization trying to help these people getting back into the society. And on our side, on our Dutch side, there was this consensus that this story was too American and not relevant for our Dutch society. So then Gwen, who was already experimenting with this, invited someone who actually works with people who ended up in prison and are young, and he told us in the discussions, this also applies to Dutch society. So if there's groupthink, if people are disagreeing on something, she can organize critical dissent. And she can also help correspondents recognize the power of the community. Tell them, hey, if you're gonna write about this, maybe you should check our Rolodex and invite these people to read with you or to share their knowledge before you publish. So these are all the steps that we're taking. We started with just publishing our callouts, but right now we're creating this Rolodex, and we're trying to involve members in our reporting in a systematic way. And I think this leads to a rich and well-grounded journalism, and it's also good for the business side of things, because if someone if a member is contributing their knowledge, the journalism improves, but also they become more loyal. So the chance that they're going to renew their membership also increases. So I think that's very important, that with a membership strategy, the incentives of your journalists and your business people are aligned. Everyone has the same goal, and this leads to very powerful combinations. Our business and journalist people can work together, they come up with new innovations, because at the end of the day, they have exactly the same goal, making sure that the reader is informed in the best possible way, so they become a member, remain a member, and share their knowledge with us.
In a couple minutes, we're going to ask questions, so get your questions ready, especially you Dutch journalism students. We're going to be calling on you. Ernst said something in the middle of that presentation that I want to pull out and highlight. He said, so we started to ask these questions more routinely. And that word routinely is key to this kind of work. We know a lot at this point, after 20 years, about projects that engage the knowledge of readers. There's been quite a few of them. One of the highlights would be, for example, the Guardian's project on parliamentary expense reports, where the Guardian put all the documents online and asked people to look up their own member of parliament and see what sort of outrageous expenses that person had charged the taxpayers. And there's been other crowdsourcing projects like that that have worked pretty well. At this point, the real challenge, the most valuable work is in moving from projects to routines, projects to routines. And many of the things that Ernst just talked about are exactly that. They're routines. They're things that you can do continuously. And so the Rolodex of members with the knowledge that they have in their areas of expertise is there to influence reporting routines, right? Mm-hmm. Reporters can go to it when they need it. So this is why we're running at the Membership Puzzle Project our new initiative called Join the Beat. A beat is a reporting routine, and the 9 sites that are collaborating with us are trying to figure out how do you engage the knowledge of readers routinely in a beat. So an example would be a lot of beat reporters now, one of their duties is to create a daily newsletter product about their beat, which is often a roundup of important things that happen and interesting stuff that was published on that beat. That's a routine. It has to be done every day. So the challenge is, how can you ask readers, members, to contribute to the daily email by sending in links and suggestions to what should be in that product? And when you try and do that, all these small little problems in the production routine arise, and by solving them, we make progress. So where exactly do their suggestions go? How do they accumulate? What's the workflow for the reporter who has to check what came in and turn it into tomorrow's newsletter? How much time does it take? Does it really save time, or is it actually taking too much time to be worth trying? Mm-hmm. So these are the kinds of tiny little practical problems that arise when you try and collect on Dan Gilmore's 1999 insight, "My readers know more than I do." And at this point, what I'm interested in is that shift from projects to routines. A couple of other things to highlight before we go to questions. When I first got interested in this kind of journalism, I went out to Silicon Valley to talk to people who had experience with open source projects in programming and in technology, because they were ahead of journalism by 5 or 10 years. Even in 1999, it was fairly common for software projects to issue callouts and to ask volunteers to contribute to, for example, bug reports and fixing software. And I talked to some people in Mozilla who had done that kind of work. For example, the community manager at Mozilla in San Francisco. And the first thing he told me was that when you do an open source project with a call out like that, the most important thing you have to understand is the motivations of your contributors. Why would people contribute to a software project? Why would people contribute their knowledge to an online encyclopedia? And when you begin to understand their motivations for contributing, then you are ready to tap their knowledge and insights for a project. And if you don't understand their motivations, or your paraphrase is wrong, if you're incorrect, then your expectations are going to be off, and what you think is going to happen isn't what actually happens. And so this is another really important starting point in this kind of work, is if you grasp people's motivations to contribute and you're correct and you understand that, then you can begin to build proper expectations, and you can build from those expectations routines. So I want to underline the importance of that. Finally, Ernst didn't mention this, but one of the principles of the correspondence work with its members is that everyone is an expert in something. Everyone is an expert in something, and part of working with the knowledge of readers is figuring out how to locate that area where they are expert, because the correspondent, by doing this work, has realized something very important, which is they don't really want the opinions of their members. It's okay, you can do that, you can post that if you want to in the comment thread, for example, but they try to tell their members very directly, we're not that interested in your opinions, but when you have expertise, when you really know something, we want that. But expertise could be, I'm a doctor, and I'm an expert in this because that's my profession, but it could also be, hey, I went through that nightmare. I have experience in that social problem. I was a patient in the hospital, and I can tell you about those forms I had to fill out. Right. So expertise doesn't have to be a matter of credentials and professional training. It can also be your experience. So everyone is an expert in something is a good starting point, because it illuminates another practical problem in doing this kind of work: how to find the places where people can contribute, and then how to understand their motivations for doing so, and then from there, how to create practical routines that allow their knowledge to flow in and allow you to make better journalism from it. So those are some of the challenges and key problems in this kind of work. And when you understand how difficult they are, that's an explanation for why it's taking 20 years for us to learn how to do this. All right, what are your questions? Yes, sir.
I was very interested by the business model of the correspondent, since as you all here know, the business model for newspapers and media in general is a very serious problem, and one that is not really easy to solve. So I was wondering, is the correspondent business model, is there the possibility to export it to other media firms, to other newspapers, or maybe it would be too crowded for such a model to be applied to every other newspaper? Also, doesn't it make such a model a bit closer to social network? Have you thought of to link it to, I'm just making an example, to link it to LinkedIn or to Quora or something like that?
So 2 questions. The first question, can other media also implement this business model? I think one important thing to say is that we didn't start with the business model. So we started with the question, how can we help our readers? What kind of journalism outlet do we want to be? And we started with writing that out. Our founder and editor, Rob Weinberg, wrote a couple of principles. I think I have them here, 12 founding principles. And we posted these principles online, and we said, if you agree, if you think this kind of journalism should be there, give us 60 euros, and if 15,000 people do that, we have enough money to give this a shot for a year or so. We can do this for a year. So give us 60 euros, and we'll try to prove to you in a year that we can provide this kind of journalism, the in-depth, ad-free journalism. And so to our astonishment, 20,000 people did that in a month. And we raised 1.2 million euros, and we could start doing this. And then from there it went to this membership strategy of asking people to renew, and now we have a business model. And now I'm at conferences talking about our business model. But it started with the idea of what do we want to do and how can members make that happen. We didn't want to be dependent on ads because we wanted those readers to be the only stakeholders. If you have ads, you also have to serve the needs of your advertisers. I used to work at a newspaper where when I started working there back in 2009, they introduced sections to the newspaper, like travel or career, not because readers asked for those sections, not because the journalists wanted to write about it, but because it was easy to sell ads in those sections. So even though there is a wall between journalism and business, with the advertising model, there's always this influence on what you spend your editorial resources on. We didn't want that. We only wanted to think about our readers, and that's why we came up with this model. So if other media companies want to become more dependent on their readers, I think the most important question you have to ask yourself then is, what am I adding? What kind of role am I playing in their lives? What's the promise that I'm making, and how can I involve them in that promise? And then you can start slowly implementing these kind of things that we're doing. But it's not just a business model; it's a whole way of approaching journalism.
Yeah, let me just add one or two words to that. Everybody is interested, as you are, in what is the next business model for news, because that has been the unsolved problem in journalism for, I would say, 13 years, 2005 to today. And it's completely understandable why attention would focus on that. But if you listen carefully to what Ernst said in reply, they didn't get there by starting with the business model. In a way, the Correspondent's business model is the outcome of what they did, not the starting point. So they started with something like this, like, hey, Dutch people, how about a news site where you are the primary stakeholder? Would that be a good idea? And then people raise their hands and say, good idea, right? And the business model came out of that. So for others to come along later and say, okay, that's the business model, let's try it in Poland, it could work, but it's probably a better idea to start asking people in Poland a question as good as that question. You see the difference? And this is why we explode in frustration sometimes, as I know you did, when people focus on the result, which is a working business model, rather than how they got there. Okay, right behind this person, there's a young lady with a question.
Could you please tell a couple words about feedback from your contributors or your members after the publication? Because in our project, we use the same, not the same, but nearest model, and we ask experts to contribute. And very often, after publication, we can see that they are not satisfied with the results. They said, you made my story a little bit stupid, a little bit simple. Yeah. You underestimate my experience. How do you work with such reactions, or maybe you haven't?
Well, we see that feedback as part of the journalistic process. So what we do after we publish the story and after we talk to members or to experts, we invite them to the discussion. I think I have a screenshot of that right here. So yeah, here it is. So below the article you see this, and it says who's participating in the conversation. So if we interviewed a member, then we invite them to be a part of the conversation, and we highlight that they're part of the conversation. So for example, this is a story about the future of solar energy and its exponential growth. We have our energy and climate correspondent. Oh, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Maybe we can put my slides on the screen. Thank you. Because someone asked that in Italian. Grazie. Okay, this is what I was talking about. So this is, you can see it below every article. You see the correspondent, that's Jelmer. You see the infographic designer, had a big role in this article. And you see the member who participated, who we asked for his input while we were writing, energy transition researcher. And we highlight his comments in the contribution section. So if he's not satisfied with our reporting, we give him a stage to share that with our members, and then our correspondent will reply. So that's how we handle it in a very practical way.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it illustrates the nature of this kind of work. When you ask people to contribute their knowledge to journalism, what you get back is just an endless series of problems like that. Many problems follow from that. And the one that you mentioned is a really good one. Like, people aren't always satisfied with the results, right? People don't always feel so great about what journalists did with the knowledge that they volunteered. So in a way, what has to happen is that journalists and readers, or news sites and their members, have to develop a more mature relationship in which, for example, you understand that if you offer your knowledge, it's not always going to be used in exactly the way you imagined, or it may not be used at all, right? And some disappointment and some friction might be part of the relationship. In an immature relationship, one problem like that, it's like, that's it, I'm never contributing again to the correspondent. You didn't use my letter, right? That's not a mature relationship, right? But when you understand how journalism works, and you're there for the long game, the long haul, then one episode like that is not a crisis. And so this is another aspect of doing this work, is that it requires not just a relationship with your readers, but a mature relationship with your readers, in which there are ups and downs and tensions and imperfections, but there is also appreciation. You didn't mention that part, right? Thank you, recognition. There's a reward system here. And maybe you could say a few words of that, because that's an element of this as well.
Yeah, so whenever a member contributes something that the journalist thinks is very valuable for her research, she can highlight that comment, and it will be shown at the top. And if you're new to the discussion, you can see what the most valuable comments are, according to the correspondent. And what also happens if when you are a reader and your comment gets highlighted, you receive an email. It's an automatic email saying, thank you for your valuable addition, you helped us with our journalism. And even though it's an automatic email, it's sent from the correspondent's personal address. So what often happens is that the member then responds with more knowledge, for example, or a simple thank you back. And by doing that, we show our appreciation, and it also, most of the times, it's the start of some more knowledge exchange.
Key word is automated email. Routines. Another question, yes. On the aisle, this woman, thank you.
Hi. Sorry, it's a quick one. What's the percentage of your overall readers compared to the how do you call them? Members?
Yeah, so we have around 60,000 members and around 2 million uniques per month. So that's the percent. That's the
in the front here.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Hi, my name is Luz. I'm with Al Jazeera. Another stat question. I'm curious, of your 60,000 members, how many people have contributed, and how many people would you consider regular contributors? And so if I can do one more question. You know, my experiences with comments haven't been that stellar, not very constructive, a megalomaniac crybaby with poor English skills. How do you manage rude readers without like damaging this "you're a valued member" narrative?
Those are good questions. Let me start with the last one. I think, so there's no formula. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But I can share a couple of things that we did to create this environment where people feel like they can share their knowledge in a safe environment, and in an environment where journalists are actually reading the comments and responding to it. That's not normal, right? Most people think that online comments are a place where anonymous conspiracy thinkers can shout at each other, and the journalist completely ignores the comment section. And that's why a lot of news sites are now shutting down their comment sections, because it's just a mess there. They have to moderate it. And I always think it's a bit like in love, like a relationship. If you're not talking to each other, if you're not investing in the relationship, then, well, eventually you'll probably break up with each other, because well, you're not investing in each other. So as soon as you decide as a journalist to value readers and to start asking them for their input, you have to be aware that those readers are very skeptic. They had a lot of bad experiences. They don't even think you will read those comments, because journalists almost never do. So what we did, and we learned this along the way, of course, is along the 5 years, we were very explicit about it. We said, we really want you to share your knowledge. We really value this. We'll spend a lot of time reading those comments. We also started asking very specific questions. So in the beginning, we were just, as I said, publishing those articles and readers could comment. That's it. And the quality of comments was civil, but it wasn't really an addition to the journalism. When we started asking those specific questions, like the healthcare correspondent did, the quality improved. So asking really specific questions, being explicit about that you really want to hear what they're saying and how you're going to use it in your future journalism helped. We have a comment space where people can only comment under their real name. It's connected to their membership. Only members of the community can see it, so it's not public. You have to be a member to see it, so it feels safer. And there's a barrier for trolls. And then we have all these little things, as the highlights, but we always tell our correspondents, if you published an article, you have to be there when it gets published. You have to, when someone leaves a comment, you have to respond right away, so other members see that the correspondent is active in the contribution section. As soon as that happens, the quality of the discussion improves, because then all the other commenters see, hey, the journalist is actually listening. She's responding. She wants to hear from us. So that really improved our conversations. But it's not a one-step manual. It takes a lot of effort. And if you're publishing on a site where that isn't regular, it's extra hard, because then it's just you trying to work with these readers. And now Jay is going to say all these smart things about what I was saying, and it's always a pleasure, Jay. I can't do any panels without you anymore, because now you will highlight the important things and add to that.
I think you covered it all. You did a great job.
Thanks.
Sorry, but when it does happen, though, I mean, these are very good preventative measures, but there must still be rude people. And so then what do? Do you like penalize them? Or?
First, so when someone leaves a rude comment and you respond to it in a very factual way, that almost always works. Because remember, the people are shocked that the correspondent is talking back to them. They thought they were just posting an anonymous, I don't know, they were just cursing at a person that doesn't really exist and probably doesn't read it. When you are there and you're responding, 99% of the times that works, because they're shocked and she actually wants to know what I'm saying. That doesn't work, and the person keeps posting insults or whatever. After you get, I think, around 3 emails, right, Gwen, from Gwen or the editor, one of the editors, saying please stop doing that. And after the 3rd time, we take away your rights to comment, and if you want, we refund your membership. That happened, I think, around how many times, Gwen? 10, 15? Yeah, in 5 years.
Okay, other questions. In the back, way behind you. Keep your hand up. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you. A couple of questions. how do you ensure a diversity of perspectives? Because it's easier, I guess, to have a really in-depth, so the health correspondent might go to other, perhaps middle-class, well-educated people for a perspective. If it's about community and being part of the community, how do you ensure that depth of relations with a diversity of people? And then how do you extrapolate that across geographies, right? So it's one thing to do it in the Netherlands and a different thing with the correspondent that has global ambitions. How do you build such communities across many markets? Thanks.
That's a great question, and a question is always really good when it's something that keeps you up, when it's about something that keeps you up at night. And this is one of those questions because having a membership strategy has a lot of benefits, and we all described them here. There's one big downside to it. You have to pay to be a member of the community. And that creates barriers for people to contribute, of course. But also, for some people, they can't afford a membership. So if we're covering things, for example, if we're covering bureaucracy in healthcare, we hear from the doctors, we hear from the patients, we hear only from people who can afford to be a member of the correspondent and then respond to our research. And maybe we don't hear from that patient that is in personal debt and that can't handle the situation he or she is in, and most certainly doesn't have the time or the money to become a member and then join the discussion. So diversity is really a challenge for us. That's one of the biggest reasons why we asked Gwen to become our conversation editor, so she can actively reach out to people she thinks have experiences with the things we're talking about and are not a member of the correspondent. She invites them to the correspondent. She gives them a 1-month trial membership, so it doesn't cost them anything, and they can participate in this discussion. So that's one of Gwen's biggest challenges. Now it keeps her up at night. And globally, the honest answer is we're still figuring it out. Maybe we have to not work with one membership fee. Maybe we have to work with a pay what you can model. Maybe we have to open up comments for everyone. We don't know yet. It's something we're thinking about, and it's one of our biggest challenges.
At the Membership Puzzle Project, which I direct, where we're researching membership around the world and trying to figure out how it works, not just with the correspondent, but elsewhere. One of the projects we have given ourselves for the next year is to develop the concept of pay in participation. Is it possible, instead of paying money to become a member, by paying in participation, meaning doing stuff that's valuable for the site? It wouldn't totally solve the problem that you discussed because it still requires time, and some people don't have time. But we think there might be something there, not necessarily just for people who can't afford it. It would include them, but for anyone really who wants to contribute, not by giving money, but by giving of themselves. How can we make it possible to join that way? That would be, it's an experiment. You know, we don't know exactly how that would work. There's lots of problems with that. I could see how it could become condescending, for example, could become a little bit insulting, but also you'd have to like keep track of it, how much participation is enough. There's 101 problems with it, which is the nature of this work. If you like problems, this is for you. Because everything you try to do, there's like 55 problems with it. But by solving those problems, you make progress. You develop new knowledge. You become a pioneer. So I recommend it to you. We have time for one more question. We literally have 2 minutes. So, sir, in front here, you'll be our last questioner.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I want to show my appreciation to that entire session. That's really wonderful. I took a lot with it, and I really am glad that I was here. It shows that the content that you offer can be offered successfully because you take your readers seriously. And you've found the answer to the question, why should I contribute? And I think this is key. And I assume that adds to your growth. And this is not, as it's an assumption, it's a question as well, does it add to your growth? That you really work in this contribution model and what kind of growth that is. It's, I must say I'm from Perspective Daily, which is a German online magazine very close to The Correspondent. Actually, one of our founders is Dutch, and we had a close look at your model, but it doesn't. We don't benefit. I'm talking totally honest here. We don't benefit from the growth. We are not growing. We did a successful crowdfunding. We have 13,000 very loyal contributors, members. But even though the Facebook forward, etc., all the things that we thought would actually add to the growth, they don't quite work. So this is a question to you as well. What can we do?
Maybe we should have coffee afterwards. I'm not sure if I can answer your question like that specifically, because there are a lot of factors involved. We started 5 years ago. It was a totally different world back then. For example, organic growth still existed on Facebook. That organic reach, that helped us a lot, of course. Generally speaking, how does this strategy, this membership strategy and working with your readers foster growth? Well, as I said, we can see that people who are really loyal, who are posting a lot of comments, who are actively involved on our site, they're the most loyal members. The chance that they renew their membership is highest in that group. But another way this fosters growth is that if you're involved in a journalism, if you contributed to it, if you felt like you're part of the research, you then become an ambassador of it. You're going to send it to your friends, to your family. You're going to write about it on your own blog. You're going to post it on your Twitter profile, and you become you're part of the team almost. So you become this ambassador who shares the journalism with a lot of people.
We have to stop.
End of my answer.
They're going to kick us out of this room. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.